Someone might wonder about a U.S. Navy warship named the USS Nonsuch. It's a fair question, because names like that sometimes pop up in history books or in old stories. Nonsuch itself is a pretty interesting word. It means something that has no equal, something unique, something without peer. It suggests something truly special, a one-of-a-kind thing. So you can easily see why it might sound like a really good name for a ship, especially a warship that's supposed to be powerful and unmatched in its abilities, a vessel meant to stand apart. But when we talk about the United States Navy and its long, long history, and I mean a really long history, going back to the late 1700s when the nation was just forming, this particular name, Nonsuch, doesn't quite fit in. It's simply not a name you'll find in the official records or lists of U.S. naval vessels. No ship in the U.S. Navy, no warship at least, has ever been officially commissioned with the name USS Nonsuch. It's just not there. Not in any class of ship, from the earliest frigates to the newest aircraft carriers or submarines. This might come as a surprise to some people. Maybe they've heard the name somewhere else, perhaps in a historical novel or a documentary, or even just in general historical context. And that's usually the key. The name Nonsuch has a very real history, a very rich one even, but it's not an American history. It's tied much more closely to another navy and another nation altogether. That nation is Great Britain. The name Nonsuch has been used by the British Royal Navy and by other British entities for centuries. So, if you're thinking of a ship called Nonsuch, you're almost certainly thinking of a British ship, not an American one. The U.S. Navy has its own very specific ways of naming ships. These ways are really steeped in tradition and precedent and in what the country wants to represent to itself and to the world. They reflect American history, American geography, American heroes, and American ideals. Every name chosen for a U.S. Navy vessel usually has a deep reason, a story behind it that connects directly back to the United States and its journey. It's a system that's been built up and refined over more than 200 years, and it's quite robust. And because of this system and the kinds of names it tends to favor for its various ship types, whether they are massive aircraft carriers, stealthy submarines, or agile destroyers, Nonsuch just isn't a name that fits the pattern. It's not that Nonsuch is a bad name, not at all. It's just not an American name in the context of naval tradition. Think about it. When you hear USS, you immediately expect a name that resonates with U.S. history or culture. You expect names like USS Enterprise, which speaks to American ingenuity and spirit, USS Constitution, a symbol of enduring strength and the nation's founding principles, USS Arizona, a poignant reminder of sacrifice and national memory, or USS Nimitz, honoring a pivotal naval leader who guided the fleet through immense challenges. These names are loaded with meaning for Americans. They evoke specific events, important places, or influential people that are absolutely crucial to the country's story and identity. The idea of a Nonsuch ship, one that has no equal, is certainly appealing to any military force. Every navy wants its ships to be the best in their class. Every sailor probably believes their ship is truly unmatched in its capabilities or its crew's spirit. But the U.S. Navy usually picks names that tell a more direct story about its nation's journey and achievements. It picks names that are like a short, powerful history lesson or a profound tribute. They're names that are specifically designed to inspire a feeling of national pride and a deep personal connection among sailors and citizens alike, linking them to a shared heritage. So the short answer right up front is a definite no. The U.S. Navy did not commission a warship called the USS Nonsuch. That name belongs to a different maritime legacy, a different historical narrative entirely. But understanding why it hasn't used that name, and why another country has, tells us a whole lot about how navies name their ships and what those names really mean. It's not just about picking a cool word or a catchy phrase from a dictionary, it's about identity. It's about history. It's about what a nation wants its ships to represent when they sail the world's oceans, carrying its flag and its values for all to see. We're going to look into this much more deeply. We'll talk about the real history of ships named Nonsuch, detailing their significant roles in British exploration and naval power, showing how deeply embedded the name is there. And we'll dig into the specific naming conventions the U.S. Navy faithfully follows, providing many examples to illustrate the consistent patterns and underlying philosophy. Then we'll clearly see why those two things just don't overlap, highlighting the distinct paths of national maritime identity and historical memory. It's a story of national identity, and how even something as seemingly simple as a ship's name can carry an immense amount of meaning and historical weight, defining its very purpose and allegiance. It's truly important to clarify things like this. Sometimes the name floats around in general historical awareness, and people just assume it must have been used by all the major navies of the world, especially one as large and historically significant as the US Navy. But that's just not always how it works. Navies, especially those with long and storied histories, develop very specific customs and traditions that guide their operations. These customs guide everything from how officers salute, to the proper flag etiquette, and of course, to how ships are named and honored. And these customs are very powerful. They're not easily changed or disregarded on a whim. They become part of the Navy's very fabric, its soul, if you will, connecting past to present in a continuous thread. So, the absence of a USS Nonsuch is not some kind of oversight or an accidental gap in their naming strategy. It's because the system, the deep-seated culture of the US Navy, just doesn't lead to that kind of name choice. There are other categories, other priorities that consistently guide the naming committees. And those committees are made up of people who truly understand the deep and lasting importance of what a ship is called. A ship's name stays with it throughout its entire service life, often for decades. It's painted boldly on its hull. It's recorded in every official document. It's what sailors proudly call it, and it's what the entire world calls it when it makes port visits or conducts operations. So, choosing a name is a big, big deal, and it's handled with great care and reverence, a process steeped in tradition and national pride. And for the US Navy, that big deal always comes back to American stories. It always comes back to American places. It always comes back to American ideals. The name Nonsuch, as wonderful and resonant as it sounds on its own, just doesn't have that direct, immediate, and undeniable connection to the American narrative. It lives in another story, another country's past, and its unique maritime journey. And we'll talk about that very interesting past and its specific details next in the next chapter, exploring the true home of the name Nonsuch. But before we move on, just think about the sheer volume of ships the US Navy has commissioned over the centuries. Thousands and thousands of vessels, from small, fast gunboats to the most massive, powerful aircraft carriers ever built. And each and every one needed a name. Imagine the lists of potential names, the extensive debates, the thoughtful decisions that went into each choice, a process that continues even today with new ships being launched. It's a testament to the fact that every single name has been considered with utmost care and a profound sense of historical responsibility. And Nonsuch, even if it sounds appealing and evocative, simply never made the cut for a US warship. It's a clear-cut answer. No, it didn't happen. Now that we understand where the US Navy stands on the name Nonsuch, let's dive into where that name truly belongs in maritime history. Because the fact that the US Navy didn't have a USS Nonsuch doesn't mean the name Nonsuch hasn't been used for ships. It absolutely has, and it has a fascinating history, mostly rooted in British maritime tradition and exploration. To understand why it didn't become a US Navy name, it helps a lot to see where it did come from and what it meant there. A story rich with adventure and historical impact. The most famous Nonsuch ship, the one that probably comes to mind for many people even without knowing all the details, wasn't even a warship in the traditional sense. It was a ketch, a small but sturdy sailing vessel that became legendary for its pivotal role in the founding of the Hudson's Bay Company. This Nonsuch sailed in the late 17th century, specifically around 1668. She embarked on a daring expedition from England, crossing the vast Atlantic and sailing into Hudson Bay in what is now Canada. This trip was hugely important, a real game changer for British commerce and colonial ambitions. It proved definitively that the fur trade in that immense northern region was viable, and crucially, that a sea route to it was practical and could be navigated. This pioneering journey laid the groundwork for the Hudson's Bay Company, which became one of the most powerful and long-lasting trading companies in the world, literally shaping the history, economy, and even the geography of a vast portion of North America for centuries. Imagine that little ship, relatively small but brave, sailing into largely unknown and treacherous waters, facing harsh weather conditions, all to find a new, profitable route for trade and expansion. That voyage was a huge gamble, a testament to human courage and entrepreneurial spirit. And it paid off handsomely. The success of the Nonsuch helped establish British claims and commerce in a vast part of the continent, securing resources and opening new markets. For a ship to be named Nonsuch in that specific context meant something profound. It was supposed to be unparalleled in its achievement, or at least in its ambition to achieve something no one else had. And in the case of the Hudson's Bay Company Nonsuch, it truly was. It did something nobody else had done quite like that before, opening up a new frontier. It was, in its own way, without equal for that specific purpose, a trailblazer. But the name Nonsuch goes back even further in British history, long before the Hudson's Bay Company's famous ketch. The Royal Navy itself has had several powerful ships named HMS Nonsuch. HMS stands for His or Her Majesty's Ship, of course, a designation that immediately places it within the British naval tradition. These were proper warships, formidable fighting vessels built for defense and projection of power. The first known HMS Nonsuch was a galleon launched way back in 1573. This was during the time of Queen Elizabeth I, a very significant period for English naval power and its rise on the world stage, a time of exploration and confrontation with rival European powers. This ship would have been part of the burgeoning fleet that defended England against invasion and projected its growing power across the seas. To name a ship Nonsuch then was a bold statement. It was like saying, "This ship is the best we can build. No other ship can compare to its prowess or its mission." It was a clear declaration of strength, superiority, and national pride in their naval capabilities. And it wasn't just one ship bearing the name. Over the centuries, several Royal Navy ships proudly carried the name HMS Nonsuch. There was a 38-gun, fourth-rate ship launched in 1668. The very same year, the Hudson's Bay Company Ketch made its famous voyage, showing the name's continuous use across different maritime endeavors. This warship saw active service in various naval conflicts of the era, engaging in battles and patrolling vital sea lanes. Then another HMS Nonsuch, a 36-gun frigate, was launched in 1741 during a period of intense rivalry among European naval powers. And another one, a powerful 64-gun third-rate ship of the line, launched in 1774, which even saw significant action during the American Revolutionary War, fighting directly against the very nation that would eventually become the United States. This specific ship, the 1774 HMS Nonsuch, had a role in some important naval engagements during that conflict, including operations off the American coast. It's quite interesting, isn't it? A ship named Nonsuch, embodying British strength and ambition, was actively fighting against American aspirations for independence. This historical fact alone really highlights the fundamental difference in naval traditions and national identities. The name Nonsuch is woven deeply into the fabric of British naval history, its colonial expansion, and its various conflicts, including those against the fledgling American nation. It represents a very specific, very British historical lineage, a continuous thread of national maritime endeavor. Beyond the warships, there was even a Royal Navy training establishment ashore, a stone frigate, as they affectionately call land-based naval facilities, named HMS Nonsuch in the 20th century. So the name has been used in many different contexts within the British system, consistently tied to their naval or broader maritime endeavors. It shows a continuous thread, a tradition that spans centuries and encompasses different aspects of their sea power. When a name has such a strong, deep-rooted, and continuous connection to one nation's history, its struggles, and its triumphs, it naturally becomes far less likely for another nation to adopt it, especially a nation that was once an adversary or is striving to forge its own distinct identity. It would feel, well, culturally out of place and historically confusing. It wouldn't resonate with the new nation's own unique story. For the U.S. Navy to name a ship USS Nonsuch would be like picking up a piece of someone else's deeply personal family heirloom and trying to claim it as your own, without any real personal connection or shared ancestry. It just doesn't make sense culturally, historically, or symbolically for the United States Navy. The British chose Nonsuch because it represented a certain aspirational quality that resonated with their national ethos. It embodied the idea of being unmatched, peerless, unique in their naval capabilities or their adventurous spirit. It was a name that carried a weight of national pride and ambition for them, a self-assured statement. Whether it was for daring exploration, lucrative trade, or decisive battle, the name consistently conveyed a message of exceptionalism and pioneering spirit. And it worked perfectly for their purposes, becoming an integral part of their maritime story. But the United States, after gaining its hard-won independence, desperately needed to forge its own identity, one distinct from its former colonial master. This meant creating its own symbols, its own traditions, and its own names for its military assets, names that reflected its own journey. The names chosen for early U.S. Navy ships were crucial in establishing this new national identity and asserting its sovereignty. They had to represent the new nation's values, its struggles, and its aspirations, not the old empire it had broken away from. So, while Nonsuch might be a cool-sounding name on its own merit, its very deep and historically distinct British roots made it entirely unsuitable for American naval vessels. It simply wasn't part of their story. It was unequivocally part of Britain's story. And this is a key point to understand about naval naming. Ship names are not just mere labels. They are powerful, living symbols. They carry history within their very syllables. They carry profound meaning. They connect generations of sailors and citizens alike to a shared past and a shared national purpose. The name Nonsuch is undeniably rich with meaning, but that meaning is distinctly British. It speaks of Queen Elizabeth III's England, of daring colonial expeditions that shaped a continent, and of a powerful royal navy that projected power globally. It does not speak of the American Revolution, of the Founding Fathers, of the expansion of the United States westward, or of any distinctly American historical moment. That's why you won't find it in the U.S. Navy's roster. The two traditions are separate, and they draw from entirely separate historical and cultural wells, each reflecting their own nation's journey. Now that we understand where Nonsuch really comes from and its strong British heritage, let's talk in much more detail about the U.S. Navy's own traditions. Because the U.S. Navy has a very deliberate and consistent way of naming its ships, a system that has evolved over more than 2 centuries. It's not just random, there's a whole system, a kind of unwritten and sometimes explicitly written rulebook for how names are chosen. And understanding this system in depth helps us see why Nonsuch just doesn't fit the mold and why it never would. The Secretary of the Navy, or sometimes the President, through executive order, makes the final decision on ship names. But they don't just pull names out of a hat based on personal preference. There's a long, careful process involving extensive historical research, adherence to established naval traditions, and input from various committees, including the Naval History and Heritage Command. The overriding goal is always to pick names that honor something profoundly important to the United States and its people. This ensures that each name carries significant meaning and reflects national identity. Historically, U.S. Navy ships started with names that made a lot of sense for a new nation trying to define itself and project its values. Early on, especially for the first frigates, you saw names like USS Constitution, USS United States, USS President, and USS Congress. These names were very symbolic, potent declarations. They represented the very ideals and structure of the fledgling nation itself, its core documents, and its government. They were like floating declarations of independence and national purpose, telling the world we are a sovereign nation built on these specific principles and our own unique form of governance. As the country grew and its naval power expanded, so did the naming conventions, becoming more diverse but still deeply rooted in American themes. One of the most common and enduring categories for larger warships, particularly battleships and later fast attack submarines, became states. Think of the mighty USS Missouri, where the surrender of Japan took place. The USS Arizona tragically sunk at Pearl Harbor, or the USS California, representing the breadth of the nation. These names represent the geographical expanse of the nation, its unity, and its diverse regions. They give a sense of cohesion, of all the states coming together under one flag to form a strong union. It's a powerful way to connect the ship to a specific part of the country and to the people who live there, helping to foster pride in the ship, making it a tangible representation of an entire state or its historical events. For cruisers and destroyers, cities were often chosen, especially major ones. Examples include the USS Indianapolis, a name that brings to mind both a thriving city and a ship with a tragic but valiant history, the USS Boston, representing a city steeped in revolutionary history, or the USS Chicago, symbolizing a great American metropolis. These names honor the urban centers, the places where many Americans live, work, and contribute to the nation's vibrancy. It's another way to connect the Navy directly to the general population, showing that the Navy is an integral part of the country, not just a distant or abstract military force. Sometimes significant rivers or other major geographical bodies of water were used too, especially for smaller ships, tenders, or specific types of support vessels, reflecting the nation's natural beauty and resources. Then there are the names that honor people, and this is a truly huge and very significant category within U.S. Navy naming. Many U.S. Navy ships are named after heroes, leaders, and important figures in American history, from its earliest days to more modern times. The presidents are a big one, especially for the most prestigious and powerful ships like aircraft carriers. Think of the USS George Washington, the USS John F. Kennedy, the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, or the USS Ronald Reagan. These are the biggest, most powerful ships in the fleet, so naming them after presidents is a fitting way to honor the highest office and the leaders who have guided the nation through peace and war. Other ships are named after naval heroes, people who distinguish themselves with exceptional courage, skill, or leadership in service to the Navy. Admiral Chester Nimitz, for example, a key figure in World War II, got an entire class of supercarriers named after him. You have ships named after John Paul Jones, a legendary figure from the Revolutionary War, Stephen Decatur, a hero of the Barbary Wars, and countless others who served with immense bravery and strategic skill. This honors their legacy directly and provides concrete inspiration for current and future sailors, creating a direct link to the valor, sacrifice, and achievements of those who came before them. Beyond presidents and traditional naval heroes, you also find ships named after other significant Americans who have made profound contributions to the country. These can include scientists, inventors, explorers, and even civil rights leaders. For example, some ships have been named after figures like Thomas Edison, the famous inventor, acknowledging the role of innovation. More recently, there's been a trend to name ships after a broader range of Americans who have made important contributions to the country's development and character, reflecting the growing diversity of American experience and the evolving understanding of what constitutes a national hero. This expansion shows a dynamic system that adapts while staying true to its core purpose. Battles are another big one, commemorating pivotal moments of conflict and sacrifice. The USS Lexington, USS Saratoga, USS Midway, and USS Coral Sea all commemorate pivotal moments in American military history, places where significant victories were won or great sacrifices were made in defense of the nation. They serve as powerful, constant reminders of the nation's struggles and triumphs, of the cost of freedom, and the courage of its fighting forces. They tell vivid stories of courage, determination, and turning points in history. And then there are names that represent important concepts or ideals, reflecting the abstract values the nation holds dear. Things like USS Enterprise, meaning initiative, daring, or endeavor, USS Intrepid, fearless and bold, USS Independence, a core national value, or USS Freedom. These names embody fundamental values that the Navy and the nation cherish. They're about the spirit of America itself, its aspirations, and its guiding principles. They're abstract, but they're still deeply meaningful and widely understood by the American public. Even marine life or significant geographic features that are not states or cities get a look at, especially for certain types of vessels like submarines or auxiliary ships. Think of submarines sometimes named after marine animals like USS Dolphin or USS Seawolf, or auxiliary ships named after mountain ranges or natural phenomena. There's a clear logic to it, even if the categories are varied, as each type of name often aligns with a specific class or mission of ship. The process for selecting these names is pretty structured and involves multiple layers of review. Proposals can come from anyone, even the general public, but they are vetted very carefully. The Navy's History and Heritage Command plays a particularly big role, researching names and their historical suitability, public perception, and how well the name fits the ship's specific type and mission. For example, a ballistic missile submarine might get a different kind of name than an amphibious assault ship or a destroyer. There are specific classes of ships, and often an entire class will follow a consistent naming theme, ensuring cohesion. For instance, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers are almost exclusively named after naval heroes, while the Virginia-class submarines are primarily named after U.S. states. This careful, multifaceted selection process ensures that every name is steeped in American context and resonance. It's about building and reinforcing a national identity, remembering cherished history, and inspiring future generations of sailors and citizens alike. A ship's name is not just an internal designation, it's a public statement. It's a way for the Navy to communicate what it stands for, what it honors, and what its fundamental purpose is. When a U.S. Navy ship pulls into a foreign port, its name tells a story about the United States, its values, and its history to people around the world. So, when we look at this intricate web of naming convention states, cities, presidents, naval heroes, other significant Americans, battles, national ideals, and even some natural features, where would Nonsuch fit? It doesn't represent a U.S. state. It's not a U.S. city. It's not a U.S. president or a recognized American naval hero. It's not a battle that defined U.S. history or a founding document. And while the idea of something without equal is indeed an ideal that any fighting force might hold, it's not typically expressed as a direct, standalone ship name in the U.S. Navy. The U.S. Navy prefers names that are more concrete in their connection to American identity and experience. They prefer names that tie directly to U.S. geography, specific U.S. people, or pivotal U.S. events. This system is robust, deeply traditional, and remarkably consistent. It ensures that the names chosen for American warships are distinctly American, reflecting the nation's unique journey. It ensures they resonate immediately and powerfully with the citizens of the United States. and it explains very clearly why a name like Nonsuch, despite its own historical significance elsewhere, simply wouldn't find a home, or even a logical category, in the U.S. Navy's naming traditions. Now, it's not a flaw in the system, it's the system working exactly as it's designed to honor and reflect the United States of America in every possible way, down to the name painted on a ship's bow. So we've talked in detail about the rich British history of the name Nonsuch, seeing its strong roots in exploration and royal naval power. And we've looked at the very specific, tradition-bound ways the U.S. Navy chooses names for its ships, always tying them back to American identity. Now, let's put those two things together and really nail down why a USS Nonsuch just never happened. It comes down to a few key, undeniable reasons, all wrapped up in the fundamental concepts of national identity, historical context, and the deliberate creation of a distinct American naval tradition. First off, the most obvious and powerful reason is that Nonsuch has absolutely no direct historical connection to the United States. It's a name steeped entirely in British history, from Elizabethan galleons projecting English power, to the pioneering Hudson's Bay Company exploration that opened up new trade routes in Canada, and importantly, even Royal Navy ships bearing the name that directly fought against American independence during the Revolutionary War. For the U.S. Navy, a nation born out of a struggle for independence from Britain, to adopt such a name would be like taking a deeply significant piece of another nation's history and trying to graft it onto its own, fundamentally different narrative. It just doesn't fit the story the U.S. Navy is trying to tell about itself. The U.S. Navy, from its very beginning in the late 18th century, has aimed to establish its own distinct identity, one that was clearly separate and independent from the powerful British Royal Navy. Remember, the United States fought for independence from Britain, a long and arduous struggle. Therefore, everything about the new American military, including its uniforms, its flag, its traditions, and especially its ship names, was about forging a new independent path, celebrating American achievements, and honoring American heroes. Adopting a name so firmly rooted in the former colonial power's legacy would have been counterproductive to that crucial goal of establishing a unique national identity. It would confuse the message of who the U.S. Navy served and what history it represented on the global stage. It would simply not resonate with its own people. Think about the kinds of names the U.S. Navy does choose and has chosen consistently for centuries. They are names like USS Constitution, a living symbol of American endurance, USS Enterprise, embodying innovation and adventure, USS George Washington, honoring the nation's first president, USS Arizona, a memorial to immense sacrifice. Every single one of those names screams America. They evoke the founding documents, the spirit of ingenuity, the revered leaders, and the places and events that define the nation's very existence. Nonsuch doesn't do that. Not for Americans. It doesn't connect to American geography, American leaders, American battles, or even a specific American ideal in the way that names like independence or liberty do, names that are distinctly part of the American political lexicon. Even if you argue that Nonsuch just means without equal, and that's an ideal every Navy would want for its fleet, the U.S. Navy expresses that ideal in different, more contextually appropriate ways. It might name a ship Invincible, though that itself is more of a British name too, or Indomitable, or even Enterprise, which suggests grand ambition, unparalleled effort, and venturing into the unknown. But it does so with names that still connect to an American context or sound, names that draw from American literary or philosophical traditions. Nonce simply carries too much historical baggage from another nation, baggage that doesn't align with the American narrative. Another big factor is the practical aspect of the U.S. Navy's naming conventions, which we discussed. The U.S. Navy follows established, often formalized, patterns for different types of ships. Aircraft carriers get names of presidents or national figures. Submarines often get state names. Destroyers might get names of naval heroes or battle sites. There simply isn't a natural, established category in this well-defined system where Nonsuch would logically fit. It's not a state, it's not a city, it's not a famous American person from history. It's not a battle that Americans fought, it's a descriptive word, and while the U.S. Navy uses some descriptive words for ships, they tend to be more universally aspirational and, crucially, less historically tied to another nation's specific maritime journey. Consider the detailed selection process. Naming committees, naval historians, and ultimately the Secretary of the Navy all weigh in on potential names. When they look at a proposed name, one of the very first and most important questions they'd ask is, what does this name mean to America? What part of our history, our people, our ideals, or our geography does it represent? And for Nonsuch, the honest answer to that question would be not much directly or uniquely American. It would require a significant stretch, an intellectual gymnastics routine, to try and force it to fit the American narrative or tradition. And the Navy doesn't generally stretch that far, especially when there are so many truly American names available, rich with their own history and meaning, waiting to be chosen. The abundance of suitable American names makes such a stretch unnecessary. There's also the element of public perception, which is incredibly important for any national institution like the Navy. When a new ship is commissioned, its name is announced, and the public, along with the sailors who will serve on it, react to it. They look for meaning, for connection. If a ship were named USS Nonsuch, many Americans would likely scratch their heads in confusion. They wouldn't immediately grasp its significance in an American context, as it doesn't immediately evoke American history or culture. They might even assume it was a typo, a strange choice, or an obscure reference they don't understand. This lack of immediate resonance and shared understanding makes it a poor candidate for a name that's meant to inspire widespread national pride, connect with the public, and rally support for the Navy. Names are meant to be understood and embraced by the people they represent. Furthermore, navies tend to avoid names that could be seen as belonging predominantly to another nation, especially a powerful historical rival or even a close ally, unless there's a very specific reason like a diplomatic gift, an exchange program, or a shared universal historical event. Even then, it's rare for a major warship. While the US and UK have a close and enduring relationship now, their naval naming traditions remain distinct, each preserving its own unique heritage. The British Royal Navy has its invincible and its illustrious. The US Navy has its enterprise and its independence. These names are part of their respective national brands, and they are not typically interchanged or borrowed. Ultimately, the absence of a USS Nonsuch boils down to a fundamental difference in national identity and historical narrative. The U.S. Navy consciously built its naming conventions to reflect its own unique story, a story of independence and self-determination, entirely separate from that of Great Britain. While the word Nonsuch itself might evoke a sense of unmatched quality, its historical roots are too deeply and exclusively entwined with a different nation's journey for it to ever become part of the American naval lexicon. It's a simple case of two distinct histories and two distinct sets of traditions and cultural priorities. The name belongs to a different legacy, a different story, and the U.S. Navy has always been meticulously careful and deliberate about honoring its own. It's about respecting where you came from. And for the U.S. Navy, that was never Nonsuch. So, after looking at all this in detail, the answer is still absolutely clear no. The U.S. Navy never commissioned a warship named USS Nonsuch. We've traced the name Nonsuch back to its strong, centuries-old British roots, seeing how it sailed with daring explorers and fought in Royal Navy fleets, becoming an integral part of their maritime story. And we've thoroughly explored the very structured, deeply traditional, and historically rich naming conventions of the U.S. Navy, which consistently prioritize names that reflect American history, American geography, American heroes, and American ideals. These two paths, the British Nonsuch legacy and the American naval naming system, simply do not cross, and they were never intended to. The fact that Nonsuch is such a powerful and evocative word, meaning without equal, almost makes the initial question even more compelling. It's a name that truly suggests something extraordinary, something without parallel in its capability or significance. And any navy worth its salt would, in its heart, want its ships to be just that, without parallel in their strength, their mission effectiveness, and their enduring legacy. But the way each nation expresses that desire, that aspiration for naval excellence through its specific ship names is fundamentally different and deeply reflective of its own national character and history. For the United Kingdom, Nonsuch was a natural, fitting choice that resonated deeply within their national narrative. It connected to a time of bold exploration, immense empire building, and the continuous projection of formidable naval dominance across the globe. It was a name that made perfect sense within their specific historical context and cultural outlook. It spoke directly to their national character at various points in their history, acting as a clear, self-assured declaration of their maritime prowess and ambition. For the United States, after winning its hard-fought independence and charting its own course, the paramount task was to build a new and entirely distinct national identity. This meant consciously creating new symbols, new traditions, and new narratives that were profoundly and uniquely American. The ship names became a vital, highly visible part of this identity-building process. They were not just mere labels for vessels, they were powerful statements of sovereignty. They were educational tools, constantly reminding citizens and sailors of their shared past. They were morale boosters, inspiring pride and loyalty, They were, in essence, anchors to the nation's past and clear guideposts for its future trajectory. Imagine a sailor standing proudly on the deck of a USS Arizona or a USS Enterprise. That name immediately and powerfully connects them to a specific significant piece of American history, the tragic attack on Pearl Harbor, or the enduring spirit of American innovation, pioneering, and daring enterprise. It's a profound and tangible link between the individual, the ship, and the nation's collective memory. The names chosen by the U.S. Navy are meticulously selected to foster precisely this kind of deep, personal connection, this unshakable sense of belonging to something uniquely and profoundly American. The enduring legacy of the name Nonsuch therefore lies primarily and exclusively with its British heritage. It's a testament to the immense and long-lasting influence of British maritime history and the particular naming conventions that developed uniquely within the Royal Navy. The Hudson's Bay Company ketch Nonsuch continues to be celebrated as an iconic symbol of entrepreneurial spirit, daring exploration, and the opening of new frontiers. The various HMS Nonsuch warships symbolize distinct periods of British naval power, their conflicts, and their contributions to the nation's defense and global influence. That legacy is strong, clear, and firmly established within British historical consciousness. And the U.S. Navy, in turn, has built its own equally powerful and distinct legacy through its meticulously chosen names. Names like USS Constitution, the oldest commissioned warship afloat, speak volumes about resilience, endurance, and the foundational principles of the nation itself. Names like USS Nimitz or USS Arleigh Burke honor the visionary men and women who shaped the modern Navy and led it through its greatest challenges. Names like USS Missouri commemorate pivotal places and turning points in American history, serving as constant reminders of both sacrifice and triumph. These names are not just words painted on a hull, they are vital, living chapters in American history etched permanently in steel and painted with immense national pride, carrying stories forward through time. So while the simple answer to the initial question is a clear and definitive no, the deeper understanding of why reveals a wealth of information about how nations define themselves through their military forces and especially through their navies. Ship names are a very visible, very public, and profoundly symbolic expression of national identity, values, and historical narrative. They tell the world who you are as a people, where you come from in your journey, and what you stand for on the global stage, every single time a ship sails into port or performs its duties. The U.S. Navy's careful and deliberate selection process ensures that every single name chosen for its vessels contributes to a cohesive, inspiring, and uniquely American national narrative. This narrative is a rich tapestry woven with threads of American courage, American ingenuity, American sacrifice, American perseverance, and American ideals. It's a powerful story told through names like Independence, America, Freedom, Gettysburg, and Theodore Roosevelt, each one a resonant symbol. These names resonate deeply and instantly with Americans because they are intrinsically linked to the nation's collective memory, its shared experiences, and its enduring aspirations for the future. The idea of Nonsuch, meaning unparalleled, is indeed a noble and universally appealing sentiment. And every ship, every crew, every individual sailor and marine strives to be Nonsuch in their performance, their dedication, and their commitment to duty. But the label Nonsuch itself, as a formal ship name, remains firmly and historically within the British naval tradition. It's a distinction that clearly reinforces the unique and separate historical paths taken by these two great maritime nations. So when someone asks if there was ever a USS Nonsuch, you can confidently say no. And you can explain exactly why, drawing on the rich histories of both nations' navies. It's not a critique of the name itself, which is undeniably evocative. It's not a judgment on either nation's choices. It's just an honest acknowledgement of how deeply ingrained national history, cultural identity, and specific tradition are in the naming of naval vessels around the world. Each country has its own way, its own story to tell through its ships, reflecting its unique journey. And the story of the U.S. Navy is told through names that are profoundly, undeniably, and proudly American. That's how it has always been, and that's how it continues to be, ensuring that the legacy of names is important, meaningful, and connects everything together, truly.